A 16-year-old girl, Nia Jenkins, stood in the opulent penthouse office of Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Tech. Her worn clothes were a stark contrast to the gleaming minimalist decor, yet her voice was unwavering. "Your perfect algorithm, the one powering Thorne OS, has a critical flaw," she stated calmly. Julian Thorne's booming laughter echoed through the Manhattan office like the arrogant roar of a predator, amused by its unlikely prey. "A flaw? Kid, you can barely differentiate between a keyboard and a cleaning bucket." He leaned back in his $20,000 ergonomic chair, a cruel smirk on his face. Beside Nia, her mother, Nia Jenkins, 42, clutched her industrial cleaning supplies, her face a mask of mortification. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, bringing her daughter to work. Julian, a 45-year-old tech scion who had inherited his empire, was having the best day of fun he'd had in weeks. "Nia, please apologize to Mr. Thorne," Elena whispered, her voice heavy with years of submission and the fear of losing the job that supported her 2 children. "No need to apologize," Julian said, enjoying himself even more. "I want to hear more of this fantasy. Tell me, maintenance worker's daughter, what exactly is this critical flaw you've supposedly found?" Nia took a deep breath. She gently touched her mother's arm, her eyes steady, a silent promise that everything would be okay. Julian watched the interaction with a cruel smile, loving these moments of absolute power when he could remind people of their place in the social hierarchy. At 16, Nia had already learned that the world judged people like her and her mother before even getting to know them. Daughter of a cleaning lady, black, living in the Bronx, attending public school. All labels that men like Julian used to justify their contempt. "The world judges by labels, Mr. Thorne," Nia replied, her voice still calm, but laden with a dignity that momentarily wiped the smirk from Julian's face. "Maintenance worker's daughter, public school kid. These are the narratives used to dismiss those who don't fit into your established networks. It allows you to ignore inconvenient truths." Her calm delivery momentarily silenced Julian's laughter, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Liar," Julian declared, returning to his Italian marble desk, attempting to regain control. "Elena, your daughter has serious fantasy issues. Maybe you should take her to a psychiatrist instead of bringing her here." Nia, unfazed, opened her worn public school backpack and pulled out a battered tablet. "You're right, sir," Nia agreed. "That's why I brought this." She tapped the screen, displaying a certificate from a prestigious online coding academy, showing top scores in advanced algorithms. "This is easily faked," Julian stammered, but his voice no longer carried the same conviction. A flicker of doubt, small but undeniable, crossed his face. Nia didn't falter. She smoothly navigated her worn tablet, opening another application that glowed with a cascade of text. "This wasn't another certificate. This was a live portfolio. These are my contributions to various open-source projects, Mr. Thorne," she stated, her voice calm and clear. "Algorithms used in public utility optimization, traffic flow prediction, even a small module for disaster relief coordination." Julian leaned forward, his initial scoff dying on his lips. His eyes, accustomed to scanning complex data, darted across the lines of code. The intricate logic, the elegant solutions, the sheer volume of work displayed. It wasn't just impressive. It was undeniably professional. His dismissiveness, a shield he had perfected over decades, began to crack, a flicker of genuine curiosity replacing the contempt. He recognized the complexity, the depth of understanding required. This wasn't a fluke. "Perhaps you're familiar with the chrono-shift algorithm optimization problem," Nia continued, her gaze steady. Julian stiffened. The chrono-shift problem was a thorn in Thorne Tech's side, a notoriously difficult puzzle that had stumped his top engineers for months, costing the company untold resources. "Our internal teams have found it challenging," Julian admitted, a grudging note in his voice. "I believe your approach to the recursive dependency tree was fundamentally flawed," Nia explained, outlining a concise, elegant alternative. "The key is to model the temporal nodes as probabilistic states rather than fixed points, allowing for a more dynamic, self-optimizing pathway." Elena, clutching her cleaning bucket, didn't understand the technical jargon, but the shift in Julian's posture The sudden intensity in his eyes told her everything. A spark of fierce, protective pride ignited within her. Julian slammed his hand on his Italian marble desk, regaining a semblance of his former arrogance. "Anyone can theorize on paper, kid. I want to see it. Not on some public utility, but on a Thorne Tech system. Right here, right now." He tapped furiously on his own monitor, bringing up a complex, self-contained module from the heart of Thorne OS, a minor, yet incredibly intricate data routing component. "Optimize this. Show me how your probabilistic states handle real-world latency. And don't expect it to be easy. Our security protocols are robust." He expected her to balk, to stammer, to finally admit defeat. But Nia simply met his gaze, a quiet fire in her eyes. "Consider it accepted, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice unwavering, a subtle gleam of readiness in her steady gaze. "I'll need temporary read-write access to a test server running module, Athena 7, Nia stated, her precision surprising Julian. He had chosen Athena 7 specifically to challenge her, to force her into a corner. Now, she was asking for the keys to his kingdom. He narrowed his eyes, searching for a trick, but found only calm professionalism. "Very well," he conceded, a grudging respect beginning to mix with his annoyance. "But any unauthorized access, any breach, and this conversation ends." He typed a few commands, granting the temporary credentials. Nia wasted no time. Her fingers flew across her tablet, connecting to the office's secure network with an ease that suggested years of practice, not just a few moments of nervous fumbling. The stage was set. Julian reluctantly activated the massive display screen behind his desk, projecting Nia's tablet. The opulent office was suddenly transformed into a digital arena. Nia began to type. Her fingers moved with an almost impossible speed and accuracy, a blur of motion across the virtual keyboard. Complex lines of code, arcane symbols, and intricate command structures filled the enormous screen, glowing with an otherworldly intensity. Julian watched, mesmerized despite himself. He saw her navigate the system, not with brute force, but with an intuitive understanding, like a seasoned pilot guiding a starship. Annoyance still gnawed at him, but it was now overshadowed by a dawning, undeniable respect. The kid was good. Frighteningly good. Within minutes, Nia's fingers danced across her tablet, a blur of motion as lines of code scrolled and shifted on the massive display screen. Julian Thorne, who had expected a slow, fumbling search, found himself watching with grudging fascination. Then, Nia stopped. A single, subtle line of code, almost insignificant, pulsed red on the screen. "Here," she said, her voice calm and clear, pointing with a steady finger. "A memory leak in the data caching module. Under specific, high-load conditions, it creates a recursive overflow, leading to intermittent system freezes and data corruption for about 0.03% of users." Julian's face, which moments ago held a sneer, turned pale. He recognized the module, the exact problem. It had been a phantom bug, a persistent, unquantifiable issue his highly paid engineers had dismissed as anomalous user behavior. Nia had not only found it, she had explained its insidious impact in terms so simple, yet precise, that Julian's jaw dropped. The arrogance that had defined him began to crack. "Impossible," Julian Thorne stammered, his voice losing its booming confidence, replaced by a desperate whisper. "My systems are peer-reviewed, infallible. My teams are the best in the world." He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, a gesture of growing panic. Nia remained poised, her eyes steady. "With all due respect, Mr. Thorne, infallibility is a human construct, not a code's reality." She tapped her tablet again, and the screen shifted, displaying a series of graphs and anonymized reports. "This isn't an isolated incident. My analysis of Thorne Tech's public-facing codebases, bug reports, and forum complaints reveals a pattern. Similar, overlooked vulnerabilities exist in your Thorne Pay transaction processing, your Thorne Connect, social integration, and even your Thorne AI customer service bot." Julian stared at the data, his own internal alarms screaming. These were the very projects that had seen unexpected churn rates, inexplicable user complaints, and quiet, persistent negative press. He had dismissed them all. Now, laid bare by a 16-year-old, his empire's digital foundations felt less like granite and more like sand. His confidence crumbled. But those, Nia continued, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more ominous, those are just whispers. The true flaw, the critical vulnerability, is much deeper. It's in the heart of Thorne OS itself. Julian stared at her, a mixture of fear and growing rage warring in his eyes. He had boasted about Thorne OS being the most advanced, most equitable operating system on the market. Now, this girl, this child of his cleaning lady, was claiming it was fundamentally broken. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, leaning forward, his voice tight with desperation. "What flaw? What do you mean, Hart?" Nia met his gaze without flinching. "For months, I've been studying Thorne OS's publicly available SDKs, its open-source components, and the user feedback forums. I haven't just looked for bugs, Mr. Thorne. I've looked for patterns, for intent." She pointed a deliberate finger at the glowing Thorne OS logo on the screen, a symbol of Julian's pride. The silence in the opulent office was suddenly deafening, heavy with the weight of an impending, devastating truth. "The flaw isn't a bug in the traditional sense," Nia explained, her voice gaining an almost academic precision, yet laced with a subtle challenge. "It's an inherent bias, a systemic prejudice embedded within the algorithm's training data, reflecting the narrow worldview of its creators." Julian tried to interrupt, a dismissive scoff forming on his lips, but Nia's calm, logical flow was relentless. This leads to inequitable outcomes. Thorne OS, for example, consistently deprioritizes notifications, filters, and even basic search results for users from specific geographical locations, socioeconomic backgrounds, and even certain linguistic groups. It learns to ignore them, to deem their inputs less relevant. Infographics began to appear on the screen, illustrating stark data disparities. A vibrant inner-city neighborhood with 30% fewer relevant search results than a wealthy suburb. A disproportionate number of customer support tickets from certain demographics routed to automated responses. Julian watched, his mouth slightly agape, unable to form a coherent protest. "The cost of this inequity, Mr. Thorne, isn't just ethical, it's financial." Nia's voice hardened, her presentation shifting from theoretical to brutally practical. She displayed a detailed analysis, correlating the algorithmic bias to a significant decrease in user engagement among underserved communities. Charts flashed across the screen, showing dwindling market share in vibrant, diverse cities Thorne Tech had failed to penetrate. "Your system is actively alienating entire segments of the population. It has led to millions in lost potential revenue, overlooked user complaints, and a consistent stream of negative, albeit niche, press. Your PR department has been too insulated to even notice." Elena, clutching her cleaning bucket, watched the charts, her eyes widening. She didn't understand the technical jargon, but she understood injustice. She understood being overlooked, being deemed less relevant. A look of quiet fury, cold and resolute, settled on her face. Julian, however, simply stared at the figures, his hand reaching out for his desk, as if to steady himself. The ground beneath his perfect empire was crumbling. Julian Thorne, still reeling from the undeniable evidence of the algorithmic bias, tried to regain his footing. He muttered something about isolated incidents, about how no system was truly perfect. But Nia wasn't finished. She looked at him, her gaze unwavering, and calmly delivered another blow. "Algorithms reflect the biases of their creators, Mr. Thorne. Your code has an echo problem." Nia pulled up a new display on her tablet, projecting it onto the large screen. It was anonymized data, but its message was stark. Thorne Tech's internal demographics. Pie charts showed a glaring, almost monochromatic lack of diversity in key development roles. Julian shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair, his eyes scanning the numbers. "This is unrelated," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction, a hollow echo of his former arrogance. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air. The flaw wasn't just in the code, but in the very fabric of his company. Nia pressed on, her voice a calm, relentless tide eroding Julian's defenses. "This echo problem isn't just an internal statistic, Mr. Thorne. It has tangible, financial consequences. She flicked her wrist and the screen flashed with projected headlines of Thorne Tech's past failures. Thorne Tech's new social platform fails to gain traction in urban markets. Major contract lost after cultural oversight. Nia explained how a lack of diverse perspectives in the development teams had led to products that alienated entire demographics, to marketing campaigns that missed their mark, and to contracts lost due to a fundamental misunderstanding of varied user needs. Julian's hand subconsciously went to his temples. He remembered the internal meetings, the bewildered expressions of his all-too-similar executives, their inability to grasp why certain products just didn't connect. Nia's analysis wasn't just accurate, it was a painful, expensive truth. The air in the opulent office, once thick with Julian's condescension, now hummed with a different kind of tension. The uncomfortable silence of dawning realization. Nia, ever proactive, didn't leave him to wallow. From her worn backpack, she produced a neatly typed document, its title clear and bold, Proposal for Algorithmic Equity and Diverse Talent Integration. She handed it to Julian. Identifying a problem is only half the solution, Mr. Thorne. Nia outlined practical, actionable steps, blind resume reviews, mentorship programs for non-traditional candidates, partnerships with public schools for STEM talent, and regular, independent audits of algorithmic bias. Julian took the document, surprised by its professionalism, its meticulous detail. A hint of admiration, raw and unexpected, flickered in his eyes, warring with his shock and lingering pride. This was no mere complaint. It was a blueprint for change. Julian scanned the proposal, his mind struggling to reconcile the sophisticated document with the 16-year-old girl standing before him. He looked up, his gaze meeting Nia's. Her eyes, steady and clear, held a depth that belied her youth. She wasn't just a coding prodigy. She was a philosopher, a strategist. "What is true value, Mr. Thorne?" Nia asked, her voice soft but piercing, cutting through the layers of inherited wealth and corporate power. "The money your parents left you, or what you contribute to the world?" The question hit Julian with the force of a physical blow. It echoed his own unspoken insecurities, the gnawing doubt that beneath the Thorne name, he was merely a placeholder, a custodian of inherited privilege. He struggled for a retort, for a dismissive quip, but found none. Nia had exposed not just his company's flaws, but his very soul. Julian looked away, unable to meet Nia's unwavering gaze. His mind flashed back to his own upbringing. Private tutors, Ivy League applications curated by consultants, a seamless ascent fueled by a fortune he hadn't earned. He had been shielded, coddled, taught that his world was the only one that mattered. And now, this girl, the daughter of his cleaning lady, had exposed the profound cost of that blindness. His gaze drifted to Elena, standing quietly by the door, her presence a silent testament to years of unseen labor, of dignity preserved despite systemic disrespect. For the first time, Julian truly saw her, not as the help, but as a woman of immense strength. The weight of his own assumptions about class and merit began to crush him, a heavy, suffocating blanket of shame. He had built an empire, but in his arrogance, he had forgotten the true foundation of worth. Julian Thorne, his usual arrogance replaced by a wary uncertainty, leaned forward, his eyes narrowed on Nia. The polished obsidian of his desk reflected his troubled gaze. "Why are you really here, Nia?" he asked, his voice losing its booming quality, now edged with a dawning suspicion. "You could have sent an anonymous report, an email. Why the personal confrontation?" Nia smiled slightly, a knowing, almost ancient look in her young eyes. It wasn't a childish grin, but the confident curve of someone holding all the cards. "Because some truths, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice soft but resonating with an unshakable conviction, "need to be delivered in person." Julian felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. He had prided himself on always being 3 steps ahead, yet this girl, this child of his cleaning crew, had clearly been playing a different game, one he was only just beginning to understand. He sensed a hidden agenda, a deeper layer to her meticulously planned assault. The air in the opulent office grew thick with unspoken tension. Nia's gaze remained steady, then she casually dropped another bombshell. "I've heard things, Mr. Thorne. Things you probably thought were private." Julian's eyes, already narrowed, now flickered with rising paranoia. He racked his brain, trying to recall any sensitive conversations, any unguarded moments that might have been overheard. His conversations with executives, with lawyers, with investors, surely those had been secure, confidential. But Nia simply gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod towards the worn cleaning cart that stood silently in the corner, a stark contrast to the room's extravagance. It was a silent, chilling implication. Her mother, Elena, the ever-present, ever-invisible cleaning lady, had been a witness. The realization hit Julian like a sudden drop in an elevator. The people he deemed insignificant, the background noise of his empire, had been listening. Julian's head snapped towards Elena, who stood by the door, clutching her cleaning bucket like a shield. His voice, now sharp and accusatory, cut through the silence. "Grace," he demanded, using the name he had always known her by. "What has your daughter been doing?" Elena flinched, her hands trembling as she tightened her grip on the bucket. Her eyes darted between her formidable boss and her unwavering daughter. Nia has always been observant, sir," Elena stammered, her voice barely a whisper, laden with years of fear and submission. She hears things during my shifts, things I didn't think were important." Nia offered her mother a quick, encouraging glance, a silent thank you for her hesitant yet defiant admission. Elena, despite her fear, had confirmed it. The walls of Julian's perceived privacy had been porous, silently breached by the very people he had dismissed as beneath his notice. Julian Thorne began to pace, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking rhythmically on the polished marble floor. He muttered to himself, a litany of disbelief. "I never noticed, never considered." His mind raced, replaying countless mornings, countless late nights, when Elena and her crew were merely fixtures, shadows in the background. He had treated them as furniture, as extensions of the building itself, never once imagining that their ears were keen, their minds sharp, and their presence a conduit for information he desperately wished had remained secret. His constant dismissal of the help, his ingrained belief in their intellectual inferiority, had created a massive, gaping blind spot in his meticulously managed world. It was a dawning horror. His own arrogance had been his undoing. Nia watched him, her expression unreadable, letting the bitter realization sink in, letting the weight of his hubris crush him under its own momentum. Nia took a deep, steadying breath. The moment she had planned for months was upon her. With a deliberate, unhurried movement, she reached into a hidden pocket, sewn meticulously into the lining of her worn public school backpack. Her hand emerged, not with another document or a tablet, but with a small, discreet digital recorder. Julian Thorne's blood ran cold. The color drained from his face, leaving him ashen, terrified. He knew, instinctively, what that device meant. All his bluster, his power, his carefully constructed facade of invincibility, crumbled in that instant. Nia looked at him, her gaze unwavering, her voice calm and chillingly resolute. "Before I answer your questions, Mr. Thorne," she said, the recorder held firmly in her palm, "I need to show you something." The silence that followed was deafening, pregnant with the promise of utter devastation. Nia Jenkins took a deep breath, her fingers steady as they hovered over the small digital recorder. Julian Thorne watched, his blood running cold, as she pressed play. Julian's unmistakable voice, slightly muffled but perfectly clear, filled the opulent office, echoing like a ghost from his own arrogance. "These public school kids, they lack ambition, and frankly, people from certain backgrounds just don't fit our corporate culture. That's why I prefer hires from Ivy League and established networks." Elena gasped, a choked sound of horror escaping her lips, her hand flying to cover her mouth. The words, so casually cruel, so devastatingly familiar, hung in the air. Julian Thorne's face, moments ago flushed with anger, turned ashen, the color draining from his cheeks as if he'd seen a specter. He stared at the tiny device, then at Nia, his eyes wide with a dawning terror. "Illegal! That's illegal!" Julian exploded, his voice cracking, a desperate attempt to regain control. "You can't record private conversations!" He pointed a trembling, accusing finger at Nia. But Nia remained perfectly calm, her posture unwavering, her gaze steady. "New York is a unilateral consent state, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice cutting through his panic with surgical precision. "Completely legal. And considering it documents systematic discrimination, I'm sure the Labor Department would be very interested." Julian stumbled backward, his expensive leather chair scraping against the marble floor. The words hit him like a physical blow, each syllable a hammer, striking at the foundation of his empire. He understood, with chilling clarity, the devastating implications. His reputation, his company, his entire legacy now hung by a thread. Julian's mind raced, a whirlwind of catastrophic scenarios. Lawsuits that would bleed his company dry, a destroyed reputation that would tank stock prices, massive fines from regulatory bodies, a shareholder revolt that would strip him of everything. He saw his empire, built on inherited wealth and arrogant dismissal of anyone he deemed beneath him, teetering on the brink of absolute collapse. The vast Manhattan skyline outside his window, usually a symbol of his power and conquest, now seemed to mock him, a backdrop to his impending fall. The weight of it all crushed him, leaving him breathless and vulnerable. He looked at Nia, his voice barely a whisper, devoid of its usual arrogance. "What do you want?" Nia smiled then, but it wasn't a childish grin. It was the knowing, almost serene smile of a chess master who had planned every move, anticipating every counter, and now stood poised for checkmate. She walked purposefully towards Julian's Italian marble desk, taking command of the space, her every step deliberate. Julian watched her, a prickle of fear mixed with a grudging, dawning respect. The silence that stretched between them built an immense anticipation, a pregnant pause before the inevitable. Nia didn't rush, letting the gravity of the moment settle, letting Julian fully comprehend the shift in power. She was no longer the cleaning lady's daughter. She was the architect of his fate. "You have a choice, Mr. Thorne," Nia stated, her voice clear and authoritative. "Continue believing people like me are inferior, and this recording goes public. It will end up on the desk of every journalist and labor lawyer in New York." She paused, letting the threat sink in. "Or you can prove you learned something today." Nia's gaze hardened, unwavering. "I want my mother promoted to facility operations manager, with a salary of $90,000 a year. I want a scholarship program for young, underserved talent, focusing on coding and tech. And," she concluded, her eyes holding his, "I want to be hired as a junior algorithmic consultant for Thorne Tech, effective immediately." Julian stared at her, slumped in his $15,000 chair, facing an impossible choice that would redefine his life and his legacy. Julian Thorne stared at the detailed document Nia had just laid on his desk, his mind racing, trying to find a crack, a loophole, any escape from this impossible corner. "You're 16 years old," he protested, his voice a strained whisper, a stark contrast to his earlier booming arrogance. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt to reassert some semblance of authority, but it fell flat against Nia's unwavering resolve. "And I've already saved your company millions by identifying flaws no one else could," Nia retorted, her voice calm, clear, and utterly unyielding. "Besides, I've prepared the terms." From the worn public school backpack, she pulled out a neatly printed, multi-page contract. It wasn't just a list of demands. It was a meticulously drafted legal document, outlining every clause for Elena's promotion, the scholarship program, and her own consultancy, complete with protections against future retaliation. Julian took the contract with hands that trembled, the gold pen beside him reflecting the harsh reality of his impending choice. The weight of his empire felt suddenly fragile, balanced on the edge of a teenager's pen. Julian's eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and dawning respect, flickered to Elena. She stood beside Nia, no longer clutching her cleaning bucket, no longer trembling. Her shoulders were back, her chin slightly raised. "Grace," Julian said, reverting to the name he'd always used, his voice softer, almost reverent. "You've raised a genius." Elena met his gaze, her eyes steady, a quiet fire burning within them that Julian had never bothered to notice before. "I've raised a woman, Mr. Thorne," Elena replied, her voice firm, imbued with years of unspoken resilience and newfound dignity. "A woman who knows her own worth and won't accept being treated as less." Julian was struck silent. The woman he had seen as invisible, as merely part of the background, now stood before him, radiating a quiet strength that shamed his own arrogance. Nia, beside her mother, offered a subtle, proud nod, a silent acknowledgement of Elena's empowered declaration. The truth, in Elena's words, the raw, undeniable dignity, cut deeper than any algorithm or recording. Julian swallowed hard, his gaze returning to the contract. He had one last desperate question, one final attempt to find an exit. "How do I know you won't release the recording even if I sign?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nia looked him straight in the eye, her composure unshaken. "Because, unlike you, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice carrying a profound conviction, "I believe in giving second chances to people who genuinely want to change." It was a devastating blow, a direct indictment of his past behavior, yet it offered a sliver of hope. Then, with a cool, decisive movement, Nia took out her phone. The screen glowed, displaying a digital timer. "This recording goes to the New York Times, CNN, and the Attorney General's office in exactly," quote, she paused, checking her watch, "3 minutes and 40 seconds if you don't sign." Julian's breath hitched. The air crackled with unbearable tension. The countdown had begun, forcing his hand, leaving him no room for further negotiation or escape. The world, his empire, hung in the balance, ticking away second by agonizing second. "You're blackmailing me," Julian rasped, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and outrage. Nia's gaze remained steady, unwavering. "I'm offering you justice," she corrected, her voice clear and resonant. "You've spent years benefiting from an unjust system. Now you have the chance to be part of the solution." Julian looked out the expansive window at the sprawling Manhattan skyline, the city he had conquered through a calculated blend of inherited intelligence and ruthless ambition. But this 16-year-old girl, the daughter of his cleaning lady, had just outmaneuvered him on every count. She had exposed not just his company's flaws, but his own, forcing him to confront the moral cost of his privilege. There was no denying it, no escape. With a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire empire, Julian picked up the solid gold pen. His hand trembled slightly, but he pressed it firmly to the paper. The scratch of the pen against the contract was deafening in the suddenly silent office, a sound that marked the end of an era and the beginning of another. He signed, his signature a shaky testament to his defeat and his dawning realization. Julian looked up at Nia, his face exhausted but undeniably changed. "Nia Jenkins," he said, his voice laced with a newfound humility, "you just taught me the most expensive and most valuable lesson of my life." Elena, watching from beside Nia, allowed a single tearful smile to grace her lips. Nia Jenkins watched Julian Thorne sign the contract, a monumental shift in power solidified by the scratch of a golden pen. She put away the first digital recorder, the one that had captured his discriminatory rant, into her worn backpack. But she wasn't finished. With a casual flick of her wrist, she pulled out 2 more. Identical devices. "For your information, Mr. Thorne," Nia said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute control, "everything that happened here today was also recorded, including you signing this contract of your own free will." Julian Thorne stared at the 2 new recorders, then at Nia. A slow, genuine laugh rumbled in his chest. Not the cruel, predatory sound from earlier, but a laugh of pure, unadulterated admiration. "You're frighteningly smart, kid." He had learned his lesson. 6 weeks later, the opulent penthouse office felt like a distant memory. Elena Jenkins, no longer clutching a cleaning bucket, sat at a spacious, modern desk on the 25th floor of Thorne Tech. Her uniform replaced by an elegant business suit, she reviewed digital schedules and resource allocations with a focused intensity. Nia, still carrying her trusty tablet, entered her mother's new office, a proud smile touching her lips. "Mom, how's facility operations manager treating you?" Elena looked up, a newfound glow in her eyes. "It's a lot, baby. But it's good. They actually listen to me now. Thank you, Nia, for everything." A hint of trepidation still lingered, a shadow of years spent invisible, but it was overshadowed by a blossoming confidence. In a vibrant, collaborative workspace just 2 floors below, Nia Jenkins, now Thorne Tech's youngest junior algorithmic consultant, was in her element. At 16, she sat surrounded by monitors displaying complex code, her fingers flying across her tablet. She wasn't just observing, she was actively contributing. In her first few weeks, she had already identified several minor efficiencies in the company's new AI projects and proposed crucial bias corrections that had previously gone unnoticed. Developers, initially skeptical, now approached her desk with respectful inquiries, seeking her input on thorny coding challenges. Nia, a public school kid, was now a vital, respected cog in the very machine she had once exposed. Her talent, undeniable and unyielding, was rewriting her own future. Julian Thorne's private office had undergone a subtle transformation. The overly opulent decor was toned down, replaced by a slightly more functional aesthetic. 6 weeks after the fateful meeting, he was on a video call, his expression thoughtful, almost weary. "Yes, the logistics for the Thorne Tech Young Talent Scholarship Program are paramount," he stated, his voice still firm, but his language notably more inclusive than before. "We need to ensure outreach to every underserved community, not just the usual suspects." He ended the call, leaning back in his chair. The journey of change was far from over. Etched onto his face was the struggle of confronting deeply ingrained biases, but the first genuine steps had been taken. 6 months later, Thorne Tech's corporate lobby, once a monument to exclusive ambition, now boasted a vibrant, welcoming aesthetic. Diverse imagery adorned the walls, reflecting a profound shift in company culture. Thorne Tech, once shrouded in accusations of systemic bias, was now celebrated as a beacon of diversity and inclusive policies. A narrator's voice resonated. The company's transformation wasn't just cosmetic. Internally, a renewed focus on varied perspectives had ignited unprecedented innovation, leading to a 15% increase in market reach within previously ignored demographic segments. The perfect algorithm was being rewritten, not just with better code, but with better values. Thorne Tech was no longer just a tech giant. It was a testament to the power of human potential. 6 months later, the sterile silence of Thorne Tech's executive suite had been replaced by the vibrant hum of a Bronx community center. Julian Thorne, the man who once saw only profit margins, now sat at a round table, genuinely engaged with young, aspiring coders. His expensive suit seemed less a uniform of power and more a badge of an evolving man. Maria, a sharp-eyed 15-year-old Latina girl, leaned forward, her voice brimming with a mixture of awe and mischievous curiosity. "Mr. Thorne," she asked, "is it true Nia got her first job at Thorne Tech by blackmailing you?" Julian threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't the cruel, predatory laugh of old, but a warm, genuine sound that filled the room. "It's true," he admitted, his eyes sparkling, "and it was the best thing that ever happened to me." Nia, now 16 and officially Thorne Tech's junior algorithmic consultant, watched from a nearby desk, a quiet smile playing on her lips. Elena, her mother, now the impeccably dressed facility operations manager, sat beside her, beaming with pride. Julian looked at Elena, who offered a gentle, encouraging smile. He took a deep breath, the weight of his past arrogance, a stark contrast to his present humility. 6 months ago," he began, his voice softer, more reflective than anyone had ever heard it, "I was a rich but miserable man. I thought my money, my family's legacy, made me superior to other people. I believed my algorithms were perfect, my judgment infallible." He paused, looking around at the eager faces. "Then Nia taught me that true intelligence has nothing to do with where you're born, or how much money your parents have. It's about what you do with the opportunities you create and the value you contribute to the world." Elena nodded, a silent testament to the profound change that had bloomed in the heart of Thorne Tech's former king. Carlos, a 13-year-old boy whose eyes were glued to Nia's laptop screen, piped up. "But how did you know it would work, Nia? How did you know Mr. Thorne would change?" Nia looked up from the complex lines of code, her gaze thoughtful. "Because I researched Julian for months," she replied simply. "I found out that he had grown up as a poor immigrant, arriving in this country at 16 without speaking much English, and built his original company from scratch. He had forgotten his own origins." Julian nodded slowly, a somber realization dawning on his face. "Nia showed me that I had become exactly the kind of person who discriminated against me when I was young," he confessed, his voice tinged with regret. I had built a wall of privilege around myself, forgetting the very struggles that once defined me. Maria then turned her attention to Nia, her question echoing a universal fear. "Weren't you afraid of failing? Of risking everything?" Nia admitted. "Of course I was. The fear was real. But my mother taught me that the biggest failure isn't trying and falling short. The biggest failure is accepting to be treated as less than you are worth. I preferred to risk everything, to stand up for what was right, rather than remain invisible." Julian looked at Nia with genuine admiration, a respect forged in the crucible of confrontation. The most impressive thing about Nia wasn't just her extraordinary coding genius or her ability to dissect a billion-dollar company, he said, his voice quiet but firm. It was her courage, her unwavering courage to confront power, knowing it could have destroyed everything for her and her family. Julian Thorne had every opportunity in the world, but he almost wasted the greatest one of all, the opportunity to be a decent person, to be a true leader. Nia's story proves that real intelligence knows no color, social class, or age. It proves that character and contribution, not connections or inherited wealth, define true success. "Do you know what the greatest discovery I've ever made is?" Julian asked the students, standing up and gesturing to the bustling room. "It's that when you invest in talented people, regardless of their background, they don't just grow, they make you grow too. The smartest investment you can make is in human potential." Nia closed her laptop, a symbol of the world she was reshaping. "Never let anyone define your worth based on appearances or circumstances," she advised, her voice clear and strong. "Your origins don't determine your destiny. And always, always have evidence to back up your claims." As Nia and Elena walked out to the waiting Thorne Tech car, a sleek, electric sedan that Elena now drove as an executive, they left behind a transformed Julian and a powerful lesson for a new generation.